We'll be heading to Parliament, the Appointments Committee, and some of what the nominees have been saying. Sweetie Amochi, what can you tell us?
You know, the Finance Minister designate, Dr. Ato Forson, has assured that E-Levy and the betting tax will go in the first budget. And he's insisting that he's able to boost revenue without introducing new taxes. Plus, the Minister designate for Energy, John Jinapor, has also made some revelations about the energy sector debt, and it hit a whopping $3 billion. We will discuss all this, but our data man, Isaac Ofieje, researcher and data analyst, is here in the studio with us to help us put everything that happened yesterday in perspective. Kofi, it's good to see you.
Good morning.
What do you have for us this morning?
Well, so on the smart wall right now is the bigger umbrella or the framework under which Dr. Ato Forson spoke yesterday. That's about the 112 promises on the economy. He won't be alone in helping achieve this 112 promises. Definitely, there will be the governor of the Bank of Ghana, because you can never talk about the finance minister without his other pair, which is the governor of the central bank. They're supposed to work together to help achieve the kind of economic promises that the NDC put in their manifesto. So quickly, we will go to what you just put out, the abolition of some certain taxes that the NDC promised in the 2024 manifesto. So on your screen is the E-Levy, the COVID-19 levy, betting tax, and the emissions levy. Definitely, there was also another, scrapping policy on the import duties, especially on vehicles and other equipment for agricultural purposes. That will be what we'll be discussing in terms of what the finance minister designate actually said yesterday. He was very, very categorical yesterday that these taxes will be abolished. And I mean, there was that difference between rationalization and abolition of these taxes. So let's go back to the smart wall and look at the opportunity costs in abolishing these taxes. So what we did was to look at the 2024 budget that gave us an indication of how much the government is projecting. These are indicative, figures they'll be getting from these three taxes. We are looking at the COVID-19 E-Levy and the betting tax. Looking at it in a span of, let's say, 4 years, because definitely this government will be in power from this year, 2025, to 2028. So if we do the math, that means that if you are scrapping E-Levy, which in this period under review, according to the Finance Ministry, the estimated or projected revenue is around 13.9 billion Ghana cedis. If you look at the, that's COVID-19 levy, the biggest of all, E-Levy is around 8.27, so that's around 8.3 billion Ghana cedis. And then also betting tax, 5.1 billion Ghana cedis. So if you add all of them, then we should be hovering around, let's say, 25 billion Ghana cedis. The key question is, within this period, where is the government going to find that alternative to get, somewhere $25 billion to plug the hole that will be created as a result of the scrapping policies? So he was also, heavy. There were questions on road tolls that was actually put to him that, what is he going to do? Now that his government is saying that they will be abolishing the E-Levy, what is he going to do about road tolls as well? And he says that, look, they have a very, common position on the road tolls, that it should be back, and that if you are using the road, you should pay. And remember that when the government, the Akufo-Addo administration was trying to introduce E-Levy, one thing that they said was that once they introduced E-Levy, they were going to get rid of the road tolls because they felt that E-Levy was going to cater for that. We've looked at the numbers, the projections or the inflows that we were expecting from the E-Levy is not what we are actually getting. But in terms of road tolls, we know that the country gets about 72 million Ghana cedis annually from road tolls. Is it going to be one of the main sources that the government is also going to use in plugging the hole that has been created? Definitely, he also spoke about this aspect, which he says that that's what going to be his mantra. That is, priority is to a stable cedi low prices and the creation of jobs, which I believe that there are some of these things that are really above the finance minister, especially if you want to create a stable city. Definitely, you need to work with the governor of the central bank. It isn't the sole responsibility of the finance ministry or the finance minister alone. There's supposed to be some collaboration. The prices, definitely inflation targeting and helping to control prices would definitely be also in the domain of the governor of the central bank as well. And job creation, this will be from the government. And so how he's going to allocate the country's resources in creating the jobs will also be very key in this 4-year period that they have been given. So what we did was that we looked at his target for a stable city, and he says that, look, he is going to work to bring annual depreciation of the cedi against the dollar to somewhere around 8%. So we looked at the data, and we are saying that this is the mountain of problem that Ato Forson is going to face as finance minister. So definitely, when they were leaving power in 2016, the dollar was around, let's say, 4 cedis back then. Now we are talking about $1 to somewhere 15 cedis, 50 pesos. And so how is he going to achieve that 8% target in terms of depreciation of the cedi? It will be, a Herculean task for him, looking at the mountain that he's faced with at the moment. But he says that that is their target, to bring depreciation of the cedi. We've looked at the data. The average since, COVID period, or let's say post-COVID, has always been around between 19 and 25%. So how is he going to bring it to 8% will be key. I mean, it will be interesting to see how the government will do that. And he made interesting comments on debt management. He says that, as I have said, don't be scared. He's telling Ghanaians that, look, don't be scared. We will manage this debt. He's talking about Ghana's ballooning debt stock and how the NDC is going to, manage it. This is the problem that we are talking about, where they left office with a debt, position, let's say around 122 billion Ghana cedis. Now they are back inheriting a debt of 761 billion Ghana cedis as of the last time that the Bank of Ghana updated this data. How are they going to, manage the debt? Looking at the fact that in this 4-year period of John Dramani Mahama, we will be resuming most of our debt servicing obligation, especially at the external side and domestic as well. How is the government going to do that? And I've said that this is the first time that the NDC administration will be running a country without a very deep domestic bond market. The first time that the NDC will be without a bond market. The only market that they are actually, have access to at the moment in the domestic space is the treasury bill market. How is the finance minister going to, manage the little that they will be getting from the treasury bill market? And the debt situation is there. This is currently what the government is supposed to be paying in the Eurobond market when we resume the debt servicing obligation. I mean, by 2026, we should be around $1.3 billion. That is very huge. This is just at the commercial side. We've not spoken about bilateral arrangements and other, debt arrangements. He also spoke about default. And he said that, look, we are not going to default, so relax, calm down. Government is not going to default. There were other things that the finance minister also spoke about, and spoke about the IMF program. And he said that they never said that they are going to ask for, additional financing. But he said if the need be, they will go to the IMF and seek for that financing, but wasn't very categorical about that. He spoke about expenditure cut, and he said that it shouldn't always be about tax. I mean, how do you bring down expenditure to make sure that you close the deficit? It shouldn't always be about tax, he said yesterday. So we decided to look at how, responsible governments have been in terms of what they, budgeted to spend and how much they spent as well. You could see the blue line is the budgeted expenditure, the red line is the actual, and it's always been above that until, let's say, the IMF came in the picture starting somewhere 2023, where we decided to be a bit disciplined, and now we are spending, below what we actually projected. And I think it will be the best time to move to energy, because it wasn't just about the economy that, we spoke about. Yesterday came out during the vet, and John Jinapor also came before the vetting committee, and he spoke a lot about the energy situation. And definitely, when you talk about energy, the first thing that comes to mind is stable power, electricity. So let's see what the president himself has been saying about electricity and then also, energy. He said that he believes that the last bit of, ECG, or the last chain of, distribution of ECG should be privatized. So you are talking about private sector participation and not just the whole of ECG being privatized. That's according to the president. So the president has a vision, and his vision is that the last part of the energy distribution, which is being handled by ECG, should be privatized. And yesterday we heard from the energy minister, who gave a roadmap and said 6 months they are going to look at that and see how feasible that will be. He said that as a strategic step, you do not put all your energy assets in private hands. So this, he's saying to actually, conform with what the president has been saying, that, look, we are looking at the last part, not the entire ECG. And the energy minister said that we cannot put the entire ECG in the hands of the private sector, because they believe that this is national security, asset, and should not be put in the hands of one, private sector. And also said that, look, if you look at the debt situation in the energy sector, when they were leaving, I think it was around $2.1 billion. Now he's saying that the energy debt has ballooned to $3 billion. And we've been saying that the energy sector, Ghana's energy sector, has become a debt-making machine. And if you look at one of the big contributors to the country's ballooning debt stock, especially at the external side, and the Forex, debt has to do with the energy sector, which generates more debt almost every year. Spoke about the debt situation the country owed to some, power producers and fuel suppliers. We know that the president met some independent power producers yesterday, and the conversation was around the cash waterfall mechanism, and then also how to get their debt paid. Yesterday, the finance minister, or the energy minister designate, spoke about that. Definitely, if you're talking about power and you're talking about ECG, you should be speaking about the cash waterfall mechanism as well, because PRC has given us an indication that, look, ECG doesn't bring all the revenue they collect. And yesterday, John Jinapor said that if you look at ECG, there's about 400 million Ghana cedis that, I think every month is not accounted for by the ECG. So that's also one thing that he spoke about yesterday. And definitely, you look at the data and you could see that what ECG collects in terms of their annual revenue versus what actually they report to the cash waterfall mechanism, portfolio. There's a huge difference. 1.3 billion, that's the actual revenue, versus 700 million, what they report to the cash waterfall mechanism. So, I mean, if you're looking at a snapshot of what happened yesterday, the vetting of the finance minister, nominee for the finance ministry, and then also the energy ministry, I think that this will be a good summary to start the conversation with.
Well, Kofi, interesting points you've made there. Talking about fixing ECG, we started from fix the country, and then we got to fix yourself, and now we are looking at, fixing ECG and privatization. I don't know what your thinking is, because, like I was mentioning earlier today, there are the state-owned enterprises and the problems they've had. There's ECG somewhere in the mix. We've been talking about privatization, at least as far as I recall, since the Rawlings era, when we started taking away subsidies on, electricity and all that. But from where you sit, some privatization.
Yes.
From your experience, what do you think about that? Is some privatization good as far as ECG?
Exactly. I think that I agree with the president, who said that it is supposed to be the last bit of the distribution, where we are talking about the revenue side. We've all seen evidence from the Haptel experience when we decided to digitalize some of the, ECG collections, where Haptel came to the picture. We've seen how ECG was able to increase. Let me see if I can find, just look at this. ECG was able to increase in revenue from 2022 was around 8.69 billion Ghana cedis. Now we are talking about 15.7 billion.
And Samuel Dubik Mahama had a lot to do with that.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, so that tells you that if we are able to stimulate the process a bit in terms of the last bit, the revenue collection, this is because you have ECG that has, about more than 61 bank accounts. And PRC, the IMF have all said that, look, consolidate all your bank accounts and make it one account so that we can have more collection. That has been the problem. If you look at other data, you see how shortfalls in the energy sector is ballooning according to the IMF. So definitely some sort of private sector participation for me will be very, very key, especially when it comes to the collection of ECG revenue.
There are just two other things I'll run by you for your quick thoughts, and then we'll get to our guests. One, the energy sector debts moving from 2.1 billion to 3 billion. You would say, oh, but it's only about another 900 million that has been added on. But here are the dynamics. Back then, what was the rate of the cedi versus the dollar versus now, what we are seeing? Which means that because the dollar is walloping the cedi by what it is, what we would have been looking at, maybe 18, 20 billion. Now we are looking at 45 billion equivalent. And then there's the bit about Ato Forson, reducing the cedi's depreciation to 8%. Quick thoughts on that? I don't know, but personally, that's a Herculean task. It's not going to be easy.
I mean, first one, if you look at the energy sector, especially ECG, now you have about 60% of your generation capacity being handled by independent power producers, right? And all these independent power producers, if you look at the cash waterfall mechanism, you're supposed to be paying them $40 million every month for their work done. And last year, we're looking at the data where ECG at the beginning of the year started with 11 cedis to the dollar. And they were paying that $40 million to the independent power producers. When we got to about, let's say, July or August, the cedi had depreciated to, let's say, $1 to 14 cedis or 15 cedis. So ECG, by not adding any additional debt or any sort of operation, just because of Forex losses, they've actually incurred huge losses. And I've always said that if you have ECG that does almost all of its operations in dollar terms, right? Producing of the energy, buying the fuel, everything is in dollar terms. But when it's time for ECG to collect the revenue, they collect revenue in cedis. So that shortfall will always play a key role. And if we're able to look at this data, for instance, maybe we'll understand why, it's important to talk about that. Yes, this is the data from the World Bank, and you can see the energy sector shortfall that the Mahama administration will face from 2025, 4.9 billion Ghana dollars. So it means if you want to keep the light on, the Mahama administration in 2025, if you look at business as usual, if they are not doing any form of restructuring or anything, they need to find $4.9 billion to keep the light on. That's a shortfall. 2026 is supposed to rise to 6.6 billion Ghana cedis. If they can't find this shortfall, if government cannot fund it, definitely will be added to the debt stock. So if you privatize the energy generation side of power, which you've brought in independent power producers, definitely you'll be accumulating the debts in dollar terms. And that's what, for me, has affected the current position. In terms of bringing the dollar down or the depreciation of the dollar to 8%, you first of all have to look at
the depreciation of the cedi.
Exactly. So you need to look at your international reserves at the moment. If you have an international reserve that's not even up to 3 months of import cover.
Indeed.
I don't think that we should be rushing to be talking about single-digit depreciation numbers, because definitely every year, your import duties alone or import bill is over $12 billion, right? 2, you have some of your major Forex earners like cocoa not bringing in, the usual 2 billion, 2 point something.
We've seen how the rates have fallen.
Exactly.
Right.
And you cannot always depend on gold, for instance, because prices on the world market will always fluctuate.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you are letting go some $12 billion in the span of, let's say, 5 years due to on-track remittances. So you can see that we are letting go a lot of things. I mean, when it comes to the, the side of, tax exemptions, the IMF estimate that it's about 2% of our GDP. And most of these guys are MNOs who come into the country and all of that. So if you...
Not to forget corruption, losing about $5 billion to it.
Absolutely.
Annually.
Yeah. So if you quantify all of these things, the first question you have to ask yourself is, if this government is able to reduce that figure, for instance, plug the hole in the remittance space, able to generate, produce more cocoa, then you should start talking about, a good cedi. Okay. Once all of these problems persist, I don't think that we should start talking about single-digit cedi depreciation. It will be difficult to achieve it. I mean, when Winston was asked on radio today, he said it will be magical. Because I don't want to use that word, but I think that if we have some of these problems,
all right,
it will be difficult.
Let me quickly bring into the conversation. We have our guests joining the conversation, Dr. Theo Champong. But let me also start with Dr. Gideon Boako, and then we'll get to salute our other guests. He's a financial economist, and he's also been advisor or spokesperson in the office of the vice president, the former vice president, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. Dr. Boako, a very good morning to you, sir. Dr. Boako, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you. Good morning. How are you?
I am well. I hope you are too.
By the grace of God, I'm fine.
It's really good having you join the conversation this morning. Let's take a quick look at what you see, what picture you see when you look at where our economy is vis-a-vis what the NDC administration has started looking at. They are scrapping taxes, but they say they are going to reduce the cedi's depreciation. There's the energy sector and the convoluted problem we face. But what background do you see when it comes to our economy and the plans so far that you see the NDC proffering for our economic ills?
Well, yesterday I was part of the vetting committee that vetted the finance minister, the energy minister, and the minister for justice and attorney general. And I had the opportunity to ask the finance minister designate a question. And I sat through the questions that were asked. I listened to his responses. I think for the position of a finance minister, yes, he answered some of the questions to the best of his ability. But I had a feeling that we could have elevated the standard. And if you listen to the response that is coming, that is the only way you can begin to have a judgment on how good or bad this government is going to manage the economy, because he's the finance minister designate, and more or less everything is going to revolve around the finance ministry. I think that there is a lot more to be done in order to inspire hope and confidence, because judging from some of the responses he gave yesterday, some of them were quite evasive. Some were in clear indications of cluelessness, because, for instance, you are the finance minister designate. The government or the party campaign on a number of promises. First, amongst the issues, one of the critical issues that was put before him yesterday was whether or not they're going to start paying the first year annual facility user fee for tertiary institutions. And he was completely evasive. He said that he's not yet the finance minister, and therefore he cannot say whether they are going to get committed to that.
But Dr. Boako, two quick things. Would you have wanted him to give data that he didn't have and tie a noose round his neck? And secondly, I've taken a look at the University of Ghana, for example, the latest batch that has been admitted, and you would realize that some of the fees have actually escalated by about 1,000 cedis. I've forgotten which specific one. So wouldn't you exercise caution there rather than just throw the gauntlet and maybe err?
First and foremost, this has nothing to do with knowledge of any data. You promised that you are going to take that bill. You are asked a question as the finance minister designate. Are you going to do this? And you tell people that I'm not yet a finance minister, but I cannot say. Who else should Ghanaians go and ask this question for? You are the man going to...
Hello, Dr. Boako. Oh, that's sad. We just lost Dr. Boako. Some interesting points he's made there. Yeah. He says they could have elevated those who appeared yesterday before the appointments committee. They could have elevated the standards, including Dr. Ato Forson. He says a lot more is to be done to inspire hope and confidence. And he says it was a clear indication of cluelessness on the part of Dr. Ato Forson in some instances. Dr. Boako, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm sorry, your line dropped. Please go ahead from where you left off.
Yeah, so I mean, it was highly evasive. If he says he's not yet the minister, so he cannot make pronouncement of that, why did he commit to scrap E-Levy and betting tax? He was very emphatic on that yes, they promised they will scrap E-Levy, they will scrap betting tax, and they are going to hold on to that to do exactly what they promised. He was very responsive on that. But on other questions, he was evading the question. Then he was asked the question, if you scrap E-Levy, you scrap the betting tax, you're going to have a revenue shortfall. How are you going to make up for the revenue shortfall? And the response he gave was highly clueless. He said they're going to cut expenditure. If you have a revenue shortfall and you cut expenditure, what have you achieved? You are telling Ghanaians that the things that you're supposed to do for them, you cannot do for them. If you're supposed to hire 100 people, you're going to hire 50. If you're supposed to construct 100 kilometers of roads, you're going to construct 50 kilometers of roads. Who loses at the end is the Ghanaian people. Okay, so we have to. I don't get it when politicians say I'll cut expenditure to make way for revenue shortfalls. Why don't you?
I have just a few quick questions for you, and then we'll move on to our other guests. Now, he did talk about widening the tax net, and we know that that has been one of our banes, economic banes. We are raising funds from the same old people and constricting them with higher and higher levies and taxes. He made mention of that. But don't you think, look at the example of Argentina, for example, and the economic miracle that they are experiencing in just about, 8 months, thereabouts, tightening the belt, the economic belt. Is that not one of the ways, while it may reduce government expenditure and maybe even development in some areas, it also has a knock-on positive effect, doesn't it? I know that in respect of the 24-hour economy, that would be interesting, because if you're going to create more jobs, then you would need more money to pay more people. But from these two angles, what's your take on that?
But I don't understand what exactly they mean when they say we have to tighten belts. Okay? The government has a responsibility to do what they think will be in the best interest of Ghanaians. So that responsibility is on them. What I want them to focus on is to see how best they can increase the revenue and not necessarily cutting expenditure.
But don't you agree that we were in some areas spending much more than we needed to spend? Look at how much we import into the country, for example. If we substituted that in rational ways, would that not be a way of cutting down expenditure, saving, hard currency?
I'm not too sure about what you are saying, but the most important thing I want government to focus on, how do you increase revenue? Because Ghanaians have insatiable wants. You cannot meet all of them. But you don't also have to do things that will rather impoverish the people. It's so critical, because if you focus on cutting expenditure is more or less depriving the people what they ought to get. When governments are so inefficient, they are unable to raise revenue the proper way without also overburdening the taxpayer. Then they say, we want to cut expenditure. And when you cut expenditure, it means the things that you must provide for the betterment of the life of the voter, the Ghanaian person, is what you're going to deprive that person of. So that is one thing I want us to see a focus on. The other thing is that he was asked a question about the scrapping of E-Levy betting tax. And it was linked to whether or not they're going to be able to do that in the midst of the IMF program. And he said yes, because once they do that and they cut expenditure, they'll be able to match up. And I see that to be clueless, because in the IMF program, when we do our debt sustainability analysis, we are required to match our debt service burden with our revenue. So when you you scrap some taxes, that will give you revenue. The IMF will require you that how much revenue are you going to raise to match up with the debt service burden? You need to meet that requirement in order to qualify for the next tranche of the disbursement. Now, if you decide to scrap E-Levy, betting tax, all of this because you have promised, politically you want to satisfy the people to say that I said this, I have been able to deliver. If you don't have any other revenue measure to increase your revenue such that your debt service burden to revenue ratio will be at par, you're going to fall short in breach of the IMF conditions.
Right.
And on that, I didn't see the minister come forth with an appropriate response to do that. I see the only way out. They're going to scrap E-Levy, they'll scrap betting tax, they will scrap COVID-19 levy emission tax, and they will introduce another tax, just by way of changing the name, just a change of nomenclature. And I don't think that is a smart way to go around it. You're trying to do that to tell Ghanaians that you can play on our intelligence. If they scrap E-Levy and betting tax, bet me, they're going to introduce other taxes, and they may be higher than even to pay for E-Levy and betting tax. So that is
I like the play on words there. If they scrap E-Levy and betting tax, bet me. Okay, but just my final bit to you now before we segue and Sweetie takes over for more questions. You seem to suggest, you mentioned that they could have elevated the standards yesterday, that what they delivered, especially the finance minister designate, did not inspire hope and confidence, and that you've used this word a number of times. It's a clear indication of cluelessness. Is that to say the performance of Dr. Ato Forson for you was underwhelming, first of all? And secondly, were there any positives? Did you get any hope at all, or everything was negative for you as far as especially the finance minister designate?
I haven't said everything was negative for me.
I'm just asking. I'm asking.
So if you listen to the responses, I think his composure and the approach to the questions were very okay. But if you delve deeper into the substance of what he said, it was completely clueless. And at some point, I got an indication of an attempt to even lie whilst he was speaking. And let me say this. I asked him a question about some data he put out in 2019 in response to the former Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. And I quoted him exactly what he said, which he did not deny. And I gave indications in the 2017 budget, 2018 budget, 2019 budget, gave paragraph and page numbers of appropriate figures that were recorded in the budget statement, which were approved by Parliament that he was part. Juxtapose that against the figure he gave, which was wrong. In his response, he lied again and said that he depended on IMF. Meanwhile, the IMF figure he quoted is exactly what Bawumia was talking about, because Bawumia spoke about non-rebased deficit. The rebased deficit is what was reported in the IMF tables later on. Because the figure we are talking about is 2016. In 2019, 2016 figures had been rebased, and we had accurate actual figures, not provisional. So when I question you on something you say, and then when he realized that there's a disparity between what he said and the IMF, you know what he said? He said, oh, even he was charitable, because the IMF put the figure at 6.3 and he gave 6.1. So clearly that is an indication that even the IMF table you are referring to, the figure does not correspond to what you are saying. And I think that in all honesty, he should have admitted, yes, he got that figure wrong, but going forward, he realized that it had been corrected, and then we move on. That is why I say that the office of a finance minister must come with utmost integrity and honesty. But when you begin to even swerve questions and even lie through your teeth, when there's clear indication that the figure you gave, as has been pointed out to you, was wrong, and you sought an attempt to refer to an IMF table, and quickly you saw the IMF figure to be different from what you said, and the only thing the minister could say was that, oh, I was even charitable because IMF said 6.3 and I said 6.1. Honestly, I lost so much confidence and trust in the minister because I felt that at that level, we need to be very honest and show utmost integrity. He failed to do that yesterday. And I was so disappointed that as a potential finance minister, you cannot even come clean on simple data misrepresentation. And for me, it was highly disappointing. But I think going forward, maybe, on the spur of the moment, in the heat of the discussion, he had to seek behind something to clear himself. But it was highly disappointing for me as an academic. You don't joke with data. And when you get it wrong, you must admit you got it wrong.
All right. Hold for me, Dr. Gideon Boako. It reminds me of some things that happened with the Honorable Ken Oforiatta back then. But I'll not go back into that. As I hand over to Sweetie Abochi, we must also all be reminded that sometimes in raising funds for the state and generating revenue, you don't necessarily need to create new tax handles. You can just look at increasing the levels of compliance, and that can solve many problems. But Sweetie.
Benjamin Akakpa was enjoying your conversation. But let's move on. Joining us via Zoom is Dr. Theo Champong. He's economist and political risk analyst. We also have Professor Lord Mensah. He's a financial economist. He's also at the University of Ghana Business School. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to start with Dr. Theo Champong. Doc, the finance minister designate has pledged to abolish E-Levy, betting tax, COVID-19 tax, and all that. Ghanaians have learned, maybe from experience, that we should start asking questions early. Did you get that reassuring sense yesterday from some of his responses that this new administration can do the job without actually eliminating these taxes and the revenue shortfall that will result in, and then maybe surprise us with some other taxes like Gideon Boako was saying? Did you get that overwhelming sense of assurance that this is a team for the job in terms of where we are right now with the economy?
Good morning, and I hope you can hear me, and it's good to see Prof. Lord as well, and my good friend Gideon. I think the vetting went quite well. I listened for the most part to the finance minister's vetting and then the energy minister as well. And I think overall, from where I sit, they seem to understand the issues within the sector and what then it will require to actually, take us, out of them. Of course, the proof of the pudding, as we say, is in the eating, right? And that would be what we see in the coming weeks and months in terms of how they deliver the substantive issues. But if you look at their experience, having been deputy minister in the former government, and then also having been in parliament through various committees that they've served on, and then the fact that they also have done a little bit of work on the side to support themselves, it does look to me, in addition to the academic credentials and all, it does look to me that the team would be able to deliver. But like I said, it comes fundamentally to how and when that delivery is done. And on the substantive issue of those tax cuts that have been promised, my position on this is very, very clear, that both the E-Levy and the COVID-19 levy, at the minimum, have to go. I mean, it's interesting that Gideon was mentioning some of the trade-offs and all of that. But interestingly, even in the MPP manifesto, they had also promised that these two taxes and others would be scrapped, right? And it's for a very simple reason. citizens, Ghanaians have gone through hell the last few years with the cost of living crisis. And especially for me, for the E-Levy, it's one of those taxes that I think what the finance minister designated said, you don't know which bucket to put it in. And many people complained that it was actually a theft of their resources for you make a transfer for no work done or very little work done, the state is actually taking money off you when you're also paying transfer charges, right, on top of that. If you look at the collective numbers and you work it out, for COVID and E-Levy, it's just around $300 million, right, a year. Again, to put it in context, that's about what we get every 4 months from the IMF under the current program. And roughly 0.4, 0.29, 0.4%, 3% of GDP, right, in terms of the losses that would be made. But you have to juxtapose that against some of the proposed interventions that they have indicated they'll be doing on the expenditure side of the equation. I think that is where, for me, a lot of the emphasis have got to be, right? That it's not just a question of spending, and it's not just a question of also raising revenue, but the quality of the revenue, the tax base, the incidence of the tax, and then how you also spend it to ensure efficiency becomes absolutely critical in all of this conversation going forward. And when I look at some of the manifestos, the interesting thing is when you looked at the NDC manifesto on what they promised to do on the economy, and you look at the MPP manifesto on what they promised to do the economy, you could actually tell very little, right, from them, which for me reflects the fact that what needs to be done, at least kind of both parties, right, agree and are going forward. But then it becomes how you do it. And this is where the tax cuts within the first 120 days, the signal, the positive signal it was sent to citizens becomes quite important. There are a few other things that I'm sure we can discuss, but fundamentally, it's also then a question of how do you actually deliver and engineer consistent growth. This economy has got to be growing well in excess of 7% a year if we're actually to make any headway with poverty reduction and translating that at the micro level. The debt management issues also, is there. And if you look at this in the context of the IMF program, the IMF is very, very clear. The last review of the program, the third review, it's very clear. There are three broad objectives, right? Macroeconomic stability, debt sustainability, and then number three, higher and inclusive growth. So everything that the NDC administration would be pursuing or driving, right, needs to come in the context of this IMF program as well. And on the relative macro side, when you take inflation, you take the exchange rate, the depreciation, that's what we've got to deal with. But my emphasis really for me is how you actually engineer sustainable growth and the levers that is available to government to do that, especially, for example, the 24-hour economy policy and the tax incentives that they'll be offering in relation to that.
Right. And Doc, please hold for us. Let's go to Professor Lord Mensah as well. Prof, thank you for joining us. Is there a reasonable chance that this new administration, when we actually have a substantive finance minister, that they could be surprised and then we may actually have to incur some extra taxes if they scrap? From the data that Kofi was giving us, we're looking about $25 billion in terms of what we make from these taxes that they're proposing to scrap. Is there a reasonable chance that this new administration has not yet come to terms with the full gravity of the situation in terms of the economy, and we may be surprised and they'll turn around and say, well, we do have to burden you with some more taxes so that the economy can thrive?
Well, good morning and good morning to our viewers. And let me say good morning to my good friend, Tio. I don't foresee that happening, where government, will come back and turn around, like Gideon was saying, to repackage, the tax that they are scrapping for us. I don't foresee that happening because, this is a government that has given, a signal of a conserved, nature in managing the economy. It's a government that promised Ghanaians cutting down, number of ministers and then the number of ministries. You see, having excess number of ministries, unnecessary, let me put it in quote, number of ministries in itself can bloat in your expenditure lines, which at the end of the day are going to be expenditure that you put out there, but then building back into the economy in terms of growth becomes a problem. We were here when we saw a government comes to power with about 110, ministers. If you split that into, substantive ministries, we're looking at about, on the average 55, ministries. Let me put it that way. We had ministries of special initiative headed by First Minister being Honorable Howard Kumsin. We had Zongo Ministry. We had, senior ministers, ministry, and all those ministries put together. Let's ask ourselves questions. With a bloated expenditure that all these ministries called for, what was the outcome? Can we go around the country and pinpoint any, substantial edifice or structure that these ministries were, or a policy that one of those ministries came up with that can sustain or can help, grow this economy? So I was surprised when Gideon was talking about cutting down expenditure means that denying the people what is required for them. The minister, through his, vetting, indicated efficient allocations of resources, which is, for me, it's very, very important, especially the expenditure lines that you don't have control over. Expenditure lines that you have control over, which are the discretionary ones, talking about goods and services, talking about, capital expenditure. The fact that you are cutting down expenditure does not mean that you're going to deny the people. If it's about 10-kilometer roads that you're supposed to provide from them, you end up doing only 6. No. Efficient allocation is very, very important. Do we know, the kind of bloated government, procurement issues that we've been having in this country?
Right.
If you consider all those into, you put that into perspective and you're able to control them, you know how much you can save for the country. So from where I sit, I think, the minister did very well. I don't foresee a situation where the government will come back repackaging, taxes for us. If you look at the, tax lines, E-Levy and then, betting tax and all those, it's not up to 6 billion, of our, revenue generation. If you are making up, if you are making up expenditure that unnecessarily, that are eating up the revenue that you generate unnecessarily, I think, that's not a good management. And that was why, we could see a government that was spending more and then trying to increase its revenue. But trust me, the economic indicators were not favorable.
Right.
We saw inflation going up unnecessarily. We saw, exchange rate not being stable. So it's not about, what you spend. It's about efficient, way of spending the money you have. And I think the finance minister in his vetting, indicated that, it's a teamwork. He's not going to, be a finance minister telling you that he's going to control inflation, he's going to do that. He appreciated in his presentation, right, the teamwork that involves in, managing, the economy. Because I saw him mentioning, engaging the agric minister. I saw him mentioning engaging the energy minister. So it tells you that he's a finance minister who appreciates the teamwork that, comes with governing a country and then ensuring that the economy falls back on track. So from where I sit, I don't foresee a situation where, we're going to have a repackaging in taxes because, the finance minister himself, if you look at his posture and the way he was sitting, you don't see any. I mean, I always put personality, I mean, in terms of management into perspective.
Right.
Because, you know, the person and then his character plays a major role in his decision making.
Okay.
So
Prof,
looking at Ato Forson's posture and the way he was sitting down, for me, he's more a conserved person. And if you ask me, he's the right person to lead, you know, the economy for the next 4 years and see what will happen.
Okay. Prof, we'll come back to you. I mean, the president has also hinted about reviewing the IMF program. I want to come back to you in terms of specific notifications.
And then let me chip in. Let me chip in here, quick one. You know, he talked about, I mean, inflation target of about 8%, which Kofi's presentation indicated that it may not be achievable. Yes, I do appreciate. Over the past, I mean, I think 12 years or so, we barely had inflation staying within the single digit. But trust me, this is a long-term target that has been in our budget for so many years. And if we manage this economy consistently and conservatively very well for the next, I mean, 4 to 8 years, we should be able to get this target.
Okay, so I'll come back to you. I just want to give Dr. Gideon Bako the chance to reflect on your responses so far. Doc, if you're still with us.
Yeah, thank you, and welcome to my big brothers, Lord and Tio. Just to start from where Lord ended, the inflation targeting thing that Kofi was also talking about, it looks quite possible, because even if you look at the third review report of the IMF, and you look at the projections that have been made for 2025, the IMF has projected that we will end any year inflation with 8% and supposed to continue for 2026 and 2027. So all other things being equal, based on the foundations and where we are as a country and the kind of indicators we have, I mean, we should look forward to having an inflation within the band of 8 plus or minus 2. And so when the minister says that they're going to work to bring inflation down to 8%, it is within the projections that have already been made by the IMF. So that is believable. I mean, if we put things right. I think that we all agree, listening to Tio and the Lord, that we are not saying the scrapping of the taxes is not possible. In fact, just as Tio alluded to, we had signaled in the NPP manifesto that we're going to scrap these taxes. And don't forget, in 2017, when President Akufo-Addo assumed office, his first budget scrapped or reduced about 17 different taxes in this country. Okay, so the issue about scrapping taxes is something that has been done before. This time around, we're talking about just about 4 taxes. In 2017, President Akufo-Addo scrapped or reduced about.
Right, thank you so much. I don't know if your line dropped or if you concluded on that point for me, but I want to find out from you, Professor Lord Mensah, what specific modifications to the IMF deal? We can't discuss the economy without that. Should we be looking at, and how would that impact our fiscal policies and, economic recovery efforts?
I thought you were going to let me end before you go to Prof.
Yes, I couldn't hear you, so I wasn't sure if your line had dropped, but please go ahead, complete your trail of thought.
Yeah, so I was saying that it is possible to scrap the taxes, just as Akufo-Addo did in 2017. What is not certain, and I listened to the minister very well yesterday, he hinted in his response, that the other way they can go around it, if they scrap betting tax and E-Levy, is to introduce another tax. This was exactly stated by the minister. And that is why I'm raising the concern that you cannot give with your left hand and take with the right hand. If they are scrapping E-Levy, betting tax, they have to do so and not introduce another tax through the back door. And also need to find ways to have revenue that can match our debt service bed. But
he did mention a few of those, didn't he, Dr. Gideon Bako? He did mention some of the ways they are going to make up for the shortfalls when they scrap these taxes. He spoke about widening the tax net, spoke about cutting the waste.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the question is whether or not the measures that he mentioned are so practical enough to rake in the kind of revenues that will be losing if we scrap these taxes. Because the taxes, they can do it, but they should have a better approach to go around it such that in the end, they don't fall short of the revenue side, don't get themselves in breach of the IMF condition. And because they have shortenfall of the revenue side, the only thing they want to do is to cut expenditure. And which expenditure line are they going to cut? These are the critical questions that we must make, because government expenditure basically is on the monuments, interest on existing debt, and then expenditure in like construction of roads, schools, and all of that. Which one of them are they going to cut in case the measures they are putting across are not able to rake in the revenues? We need to know such that the Ghanaian people will know that if we are cutting expenditure because we are scrapping taxes, it is not going to affect expenditure that will have to go into supporting the vulnerable. It's not going to affect expenditure that will have to go into paying teacher training allowances or giving scholarships to people or constructing roads. These are critical questions that we need to ask.
I am curious, and of course, we would all be concerned about any expenditure cuts that may affect, social intervention policies like LEAP, like free SHS. I get your point. But during COVID, when the former president, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, asked us to tighten our belts, what did he mean? Where were we going to cut, reduce expenditure, and all of that? I ask from the standpoint of the number of ministers that were reduced, which Professor Mensah has alluded to. That in itself has a knock-on effect in terms of our expenditure. Are you saying that beyond these key areas, there are no ways of tightening our belts, cutting down on expenditure to cut our coat according to our cloth? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that. If there are other ways, the minister ought to come clear and tell us those other ways. Then we can analyze them to see the fiscal impact, because we can also talk about ideas. But what is the fiscal impact? Okay. And it is not me or you to tell Ghanaians that these are the other ways. It may be early days yet, but we need to know, and I expect to see that signaled in the budget that the minister is going to present to Parliament. In the budget, we should be able to know that these are the expenditure lines that we want to cut. These are the fiscal impacts in quantifiable terms. This is how much it will help us to be able to address this shortfall. These are critical questions that we are asking and drawing the minister's attention to them now, such that in the budget, there would be clarity. At this point, he may not be able to lay bare all the things they want to do. But we also have to help by bringing out the question and suggesting the ideas, such that in the budget, there should be utmost clarity. If you're cutting expenditure, is it salaries? If you're cutting expenditure, is it reducing ministers?
All right. Now, you may not be in power, but you are still in government. And that's why some of you are members of parliament. You were on that appointments committee, and you are supposed to help the party that is in power to govern. So from where you sit, what are some of the areas where indeed such expenditure could be cut while still ensuring that the developmental needs of the people, social needs, public needs are met?
If the government or the minister appears before us in Parliament and brings this forth to act for suggestions, we will contribute and offer ideas to the minister as to the best ways to go around it.
But as of now, you cannot make any proposals.
I'm saying that in my capacity as a member of Parliament, what can I do to help? And I'm saying that if the minister appears before us in Parliament and brings his proposals, we will scrutinize the proposals. And whatever ideas we have to offer, we will offer those ideas to the minister.
Would that proposal necessarily be the budget?
You mean budget as in what?
I mean, you're talking about the minister's proposals, and I'm saying that...
No, the minister is allowed to come to parliamentary select committees, either finance or whatever. I don't know which committee I'm going to serve, but I'm sure, I'll be on one of the committees that will be related to the works of the minister. The minister shall not, don't just go to Parliament because of budget. There are other avenues through which the minister comes to Parliament, presents ideas or proposals to Parliament. Those ideas are...
Dr. Boako, I get that. I was just asking what avenue you felt maybe this would take. But thanks for the clarity. Please hold for me. Let me bring in Dr. Theo Champong. Dr. Ato Forson yesterday made mention of the fact that his priority included a stable cedi, low prices, and job creation. Now we know by what extent the CD's value has been eroded, and which has, again, a knock-on effect on even our energy sector debt. Because if how many years ago you were looking at $2.1 billion and its equivalent in CD terms, now you're looking at $3 billion, which is the equivalent of at least 45 billion Ghana cedis. Then you look at low prices of goods, services, and a lot of people are still in the doldrums as far as that is concerned. And then job creation. How Herculean a task are these three, which the finance minister designate has taken on?
Right, but that's why we need big brains, and we have people like him and others at the Ministry of Finance and the other ministries to actually deliver on this. Yes, you're right that ultimately it's within the realm or the remit of the finance ministry. However, there are other components to it. So, for example, the question of low pricing, basically inflation management, it's not just a fiscal issue. There is the monetary side to it, what the Bank of Ghana, right, does. There's also an agriculture side to it. So if you unpack inflation in Ghana, food versus non-food, in the last few months, we actually did see some of the food inflation, right, figures going up. So it then comes back to, okay, with all the things that we say we want to do on, say, the 24-hour economy, right?
Right.
How do we engineer agri-sector recovery and growth such that we're actually consuming more of the local produce at competitive prices, and then that has a cascading impact on inflation, and then also ultimately has an impact on the city. So these three things are actually linked dynamically. If you just take the city for a moment, historically, the city actually has been depreciating by about what 12-15% every year. In that regard, I think in one particular year, this would have been either 2021 or in the early days of the MPP, it was probably around 5% or so, something in that regard. But what is really important for many businesses and for many traders is not necessarily the rate coming down, even though that would help. People just want stability, right? So if it is 14 cedis to $1 now, and we can play within that band, plus or minus, you know, the 15-20% depreciation, okay, so be it. It can come down even further, right? But if you just look at the historical data and you did an extrapolation of that, you're probably looking about what 15% or so, right? Depreciation in that context. The issue of job creation is the one that, for me, I think is, like I already indicated, extremely paramount, because at the end of the day, with all these big macroeconomic indicators, inflation, exchange rate, managing the debt, and all of that, if it does not cascade and translate into improving the lives of the people at the grassroots, then forget about it. We've lost the plot in that regard. So the job creation agenda and how you unleash and ensure that the private sector can actually compete and participate becomes extremely important, right? Going forward. So again, what sort of incentives are we going to offer the private sector? To what extent? Prof. Lord studies the financial markets, and he will tell you, you look at the data, the government is literally outborrowing the private sector. And you go to the markets, you want to borrow from the banks, they are charging you 30% plus, right? There is no way you can compete and create those jobs if those conditions are not right. So they are very much dynamically linked. But I also kind of want to caution a little bit here that it's not going to take overnight to turn this economy right around. There's sort of structural issues that we're dealing with and some of the challenges that we have to overcome. For example, in the energy sector, with the mess at ECG. In the cocoa sector, again, with the declining production and the other challenges within that sector, you look at other sectors of the economy. These things are not going to happen overnight in terms of turning it around. I think at the minimum, you need probably about a year and a half before you begin to see those lag effects beginning to come through. But it's important for the government to send the right early signals to both citizens and to the investor community. And this is where, for example, some of those little tax cuts, as I call it for consumers, the reforms to the VAT regime, ensuring that goods can be cleared at the ports and the taxes are not killing businesses, that people can go to the banks and they'll be able to borrow, bringing down inflation. I don't think is going to get to 10% anytime soon. It's probably a year and a half down the line. But all those things become extremely important, right, going forward. But ultimately, this economy has to deliver for Ghanaians in terms of jobs.
All right.
Ben, the question I threw to Professor Lord Mensah earlier, I do want to pick his thoughts on that briefly before you come in. I mean, we cannot discuss this without talking about the IMF. Prof, I just want to find out from you where all these proposals and policies sit in the IMF program, especially with talks of, reviewing it. So what exactly should we be looking at in terms of specific modifications, and how would it impact our fiscal policies and economic recovery quest?
So, I mean, from where I sit, my understanding, and clearly we know very well that under an IMF program, we have, our economic indicators behaving in a good manner, which intends to help us, hit some targets that are good for a good economy. And it has been with us all these years as far as, our visit to IMF is concerned. And so, first of all, I will ask for, extension of the program. And extending the program means that we shouldn't aggressively come out of it. Because as we speak now, IMF is more or less, behaving like a headmaster who, controls the way we source for funds and the way we manage, the funds available. And so we're having that kind of soft supervision on our budget alone, is helping the economy come through to certain target. And so I will ask for maybe a year or two extension. We shouldn't aggressively come out of that. And then also the previous, if you look into the program very well, it talks about expenditure rationalization and revenue enhancement. And I think the previous administration emphasized on, revenue enhancement by introducing taxes here and there. This government should be able to shift the focus and delve deeper into the expenditure rationalization aspect of it and see how efficiently we can allocate the little resources that we'll be able to make as a result of, government scrapping, some few, I call it nuisance taxes here and there. Somebody will say betting tax should stay because it's more or less a sin tax. And at the end of the day, betting in itself have a way of building back into the economy because it improves on the consumption levels of the unemployed youths that are moving around. Because when they bet and they get something, one way or the other, they're going to, purchase, with it in the economy. So from where I sit, I think, these are the things that the government can do to help in, appreciate the direction of the economy. But then let's also look at, the three key things that the vetted finance minister talked about. Looking at stability in the city, price stability, and then job creation. Sequencing these three things clearly tells you that the minister understands the pass-through effect of, having a stable currency. Theo indicated that the currency is not supposed to come down, but then having it been stable alone is enough to help in price stabilization. because we import a lot of our inflation. Let me put it that way. Now, if you look at the global price of fuel, if you look at global price of food, it has a way of building up into our domestic prices of food here and there. So having this in the interim, having a stable cedi in itself will help in what? Growing the economy. Because if you take stability in the currency, that is when businesses can plan. That is when businesses can be able to determine the next level of dollar that they're going to purchase for their import. By so doing, they should be able to go to the the bank, approach the bank, and then have a loan, and they can relate the loan to the currency depreciation or currency appreciation.
Right.
So the interest on the loan to the currency appreciation or the currency depreciation. So effectively, that should be able to help, and in itself can propel savings, if you put it that way. And once savings improves, okay, it's going to help. And if you look at price stability as well, price stability will build up into household savings, because we've had over the past years.
And Prof, you have to wrap on that point for me.
Because of inflation levels, households are not able to save. And we know the aggregation, effect of savings. Once savings goes on, individuals and businesses can go and borrow and expand their businesses. And through that, they can create jobs. So from where I sit, I think the minister understands the pass-through effect of, the currency stability.
Thank you. Ben.
Let me also bring in Nana Amwesi, the 7th Executive Director, Institute for Energy Security. He joins the conversation as well. Nana Amwesi, good morning. That doesn't sound good. It appears we lost him right on the cusp of speaking to him. We'll try to get him and just sneak through, because Nana Amwesi, I recall, said sometime last year in April that the energy sector was shepherdless. In other words, without leadership. I was going to put to him whether he felt with John Abu Jinapo, it looked like it would receive a shepherd, and what his thinking was on our $3 billion debt and the way forward. Let's see whether we can get Nana Amwesi, the 7th, back. Nana Amwesi, good morning. Nana, if you can hear me, good morning to you. I think there's a problem there somewhere. Kofi Ajay, now, having listened to all of these conversations, before we try to see whether we can get Nana Amwesi back on the line, what are your takeaways? Having heard the ministers designate, especially for finance and energy, speak, and the conversations we're having here with the economists and the finance people also sharing their thoughts, including a former advisor to Dr. Bawumia, Dr. Gideon Boako. What are your takeaways?
Watch the vetting, and you could see that this is a man who is confident about the job and about data as well. I mean, you could see he's read the IMF programs and he knows the data, he knows the projections.
You're talking about Dr. Ato Forson.
Dr. Ato Forson. I mean, he's clear that we could achieve that 8% inflation target by 2025, because the IMF also says that by 2025 we should be at 8%, holding all other factors constant.
I'll have to hold you briefly and come to you. Nana Amwesi, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, please.
All right. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. In April last year, you said the energy ministry or the energy sector was shepherdless, without leadership. Do you see leadership from John Abu Jinapo? And with our $3 billion debt hanging around our necks and the proposals he's made, what do you see to be the way forward? Quick thoughts?
Well, thanks for having me. And good morning to your listeners and viewers. I did make a statement about shepherd relative to a situation. John Jinapo is just about coming into office. He's not been approved. But if you want to gauge his capacity to run the sector, then probably you want to look at his past experiences and the learning curve and also what's been able to read. As a student in energy law economics, I think that it's something that inures his advantage in such a role. Also a former deputy power minister, I think that's also another part that he can use to propel him to another level. Now to the debt in the sector, there's something that must be dealt with as soon as possible, because until we're able to fix the inefficiencies, the revenue leakages, in particular the ECG, this debt will keep on increasing. And the increasing debt compels government to come in at a point in time just to rescue a situation. And we all know that government or the economy itself is struggling. And so if we add on the debt of the sector to the economy and the management of same, then we're putting a fiscal burden on the entire economy. And so a way must be found to address the challenge. And I'm sure that a broad stakeholder engagement, as he has indicated, is a way to begin to look at the teething problems and resolve them. And so the debt must be managed. And for now, I can say that, yes, there is a new leader in town, but he's yet to be tested practically on the job.
All right. Thank you for those thoughts. And let me just correct, I have said twice John Abu Jinapo. I've been merging the two brothers. So he's Abdullah, John Abdullah Jinapo, and of course his brother is Abu Jinapo. I don't know, sweetie, whether you have any add-ons as far as the energy sector is concerned.
I'll probably just add my voice to the many Ghanaians, so say, whatever you do, just keep the lights on, because at the end of the day, that's all that we need. Kofi, thank you so much for putting that data in perspective for us. Benjamin, I know y'all said something I missed, but what did he say?
What did who say? Kofi?
Right, okay, but...
Well, it's been quite the conversation, hasn't it, on energy and the appointees. But basically, we're going to take a breather here. There's still a lot more to come. Yesterday, we started a conversation on the fire service and the impediments they face. We'll be delving into that and more. You want to stay with us. But let's quickly acknowledge those who joined us. We just had Nana Mwesi, the 7th. He is Executive Director, Institute for Energy Security. We had Dr. Gideon Boako. He's a financial analyst. He's also been in the office of the Vice President advising on finance-related matters. We had Professor Lord Mensah of the University of Ghana Business School. We also had joining the conversation Dr. Theo Echampong as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much for having joined us this morning. We are grateful.
Stick and stay. There's so much action coming your way. We'll be back in a bit.